We welcome you today to the Municipal Council meeting. Today's January 7th, 2014. Welcome to the new year. At 5:40, we're in the council chambers. We will begin with an opening prayer by Eric Anderson. Thank you, Eric. And a pledge by Taylor Anderson, Troop 779.
Our dear Heavenly Father, as we come here at the opening of this meeting, we ask that your guidance will be with these people who make the decisions for our city. We ask that you'll watch over them. We ask that you'll help us all get home in safety. We say this in the name of my Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Will the audience please rise and pledge allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The audience may be seated.
Thank you very much. We'll begin this meeting also with a roll call. And ask Mr. Parker to start us off with that.
Wayne Parker.
John Curtis.
Dave Sewell.
Hal Miller.
Kay Van Buren.
Gary Winterton.
Kim Santiago.
Stephen Hales.
Gary Garrett. Ryan Jones. Matt Taylor.
Thank you. We'd like to let you know that the council asked that the citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off electronic devices, being respectful to council and others, and refraining from applauding during proceedings of this meeting. Our first item of business will be to approve the minutes for December 17th, either approve or amend. Call for some action on those minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I have a correction to suggest on the vote for item number 9. In the minutes, it is shown as a 6-1 vote. I believe that is the vote where at the last minute Councilwoman Cabanilla changed her mind. I believe that should be 5-2. And I believe you acknowledged that. I discussed that with her just not a little while ago.
Janine, help me on that one. Is that correct? Are you with us on that?
Yes. I'll go back and review it.
Okay. Okay, if she's going to review that, I might suggest that we hold off on that. If we can review both of those minutes next week, at our next council meeting. But we'll. So we will. I appreciate that. In fact, maybe we can make that recommendation. We can do that subject to that. We can approve it subject to that. Any other additions or corrections? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I noticed a hand in the audience. Is it appropriate to...
Darn it, not right now.
Okay.
Sorry. I think maybe what we better do is just wait. We'll hold off on those minutes to regard the question so that we can take care of the issue if there's any question about that. We will now move to item number 1, election of a municipal council officers, chair and vice chair for calendar year 2014. And Mr. Taylor and Mr. Jones, is there any discussion that we need to have as we do this?
I don't believe so. If there's any questions you'd like me to answer regarding the process or the ordinance beforehand, I'm happy to do that. The ordinance simply requires that at the first meeting at the beginning of the year that a chair and a vice chair be elected. The process in the ordinance is to take nominations and then call for a vote without discussion.
Okay, with that being said, we will look for nominations for a chair at the Provo Municipal Council. Ms. Santiago.
I nominate Hal Miller for chair.
I would like to second that nomination. Are there any discussion on the nomination? Maybe, in fact, we are not allowed to do that. Are there any other nominations at this point? Thanks, Kay. We will call for that, a vote on that nomination then. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. And at this point,
Well, it's a little bit vague. I mean, as Mr. Miller has pointed out with the entire ordinance, right? It says that the newly elected council chair takes office immediately at the end of the election. But it actually says the newly elected municipal council chair and vice chair shall take office immediately at the end of the election. Frankly, in my mind, it's an open question whether that means after both elections or after only the election of the chair.
I believe in practice, the current chair has continued with the election of the vice chair.
So I think you can stay until the vice chair has been elected.
I'm not going anywhere. But what I am going to do is, Mr. Miller has asked me if I would ask for nominations for vice chair of our Provo Municipal Council.
Councilmember Winterton, I'd like to nominate Councilmember Kim Santiago as vice chair.
Okay. Is there a second for that nomination?
Second.
Okay. Are there any other nominations at this point? Okay. Those in favor of Santiago as vice chair of the Provo Municipal Council, please indicate. Thank you. That passes unanimously. And at this point, I will now turn the time over to our new chair, Mr. Miller.
Next is a resolution appointing the election of the chair and vice chair of the Provo City Municipal Council for the calendar year 2014. We turn to Mr. Taylor and Mr. Jones for presentation.
This is simply a resolution approving, it says appointing, the resolution itself actually says acknowledging, but this is just approval of an action to approve a written resolution that will make official the election that's just happened. So right now you have a resolution in front of you that has at line 16 blanks for the chair, names of the chair and the vice chair. So what would be required at this point would be a motion to approve that resolution with the names of Mr. Miller and Mrs. Santiago inserted into those two blanks.
Thank you. I invite a motion.
I move to approve as indicated.
And a second? It has been moved and seconded. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. When I first became a member of the Municipal Council, I had already heard the term leadership a number of times, and of course it was frequent in those early days of membership in the council. Although initially I was unsure quite what it meant. It was just the single word, leadership. It wasn't the leadership, our leadership, the council's leadership, just leadership. It had a kind of monolithic ring to it, almost Orwellian, I thought. And then in time, I learned that it was a shorthand. It was a shorthand for the chair of the municipal council and the vice chair. They were leadership. And in the past year, leadership were Mr. Winterton and Mr. Van Buren. I was with them frequently, both in official meetings of the municipal council and on many other occasions as well. You know perhaps that each is a successful businessman. Mr. Winterton owns property on University Avenue. He manages that property. Mr. Van Buren is the owner of a custom home construction company. Each of these gentlemen has, for the better part of his adult life, been deeply devoted to Provo and its future, and indeed in many informal ways, but also in formal ways within the government of the city. Now, in becoming leadership, they assumed a specified list of duties that had them, of course, conducting the official meetings of the council. They were often in the public at the invitation of the mayor at particular special public events. They met often with individuals seeking their company in private interviews and other appointments, so a good deal was done behind the scenes as well. But they were the public face and the public voice of the municipal council in important ways. And in my opinion, they performed handsomely and responsibly in that role. If we extended that list of duties, it would be very long. And if we were to somehow make an accounting of the time they gave and the effort that they made despite a welter of competing demands otherwise, it would be very sizable. I want you to understand that these are two people who have given themselves in an altogether generous way to this community. And thus we are indebted to them for the planful, thoughtful, considerate, well-informed way in which they brought leadership to the municipal council. Now, on behalf of my colleagues past and those who have joined us freshly, I salute and express profound gratitude and lasting gratitude to Gary Winterton and to Kay Van Buren for leadership, and a memento on this occasion. Mr. Winterton. And Mr. Van Buren. I call for a motion to adjourn as the Municipal Council and reconvene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo.
In this case, in the absence of the former chair of the redevelopment agency, I would defer to the vice chair to conduct these proceedings after the motion.
Yes.
I'll also move them.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded. All in favor? That is unanimous. We are adjourned.
As the current vice chair of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo, I would like to ask for nominations for a new chair and vice chair for the Redevelopment Agency of Provo. So I open the nominations for that post.
I would like to nominate Stephen Hales for RDA Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
So motion by Councilmember Sewell for Councilmember Stephen Hales to serve as chair of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo. A motion seconded by Councilmember Santiago. All in favor? The voting is unanimous. I now open the nominations to serve as vice chair of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo City for the calendar year 2014. Are there nominations?
I would like to nominate Dave Sewell for the vice chair position of the RDA.
Thank you, Mr. Hales. Is there a second?
I second the nomination.
We have a nomination for Mr. Dave Sewell to serve as vice chair of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo. A motion seconded by Council Chair Hal Miller. Those in favor? And again, that vote is unanimous. I'd like to now call for a motion to adjourn as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo and reconvene as a municipal council.
If I might interrupt for one moment, sorry, Mr. Garrett. We need to do the same thing with this election as we did with the last one, which is to now approve a resolution memorializing those elections. That's item number 4 on the agenda.
Thank you. Brian, I now look for a resolution appointing the chair and vice chair of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo for the calendar year 2014.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Van Buren. And a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Winterton, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. A unanimous vote. Now we will look to adjourn as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo and reconvene as a municipal council. Motion
So moved.
by Mr. Winterton and a second
Second.
by Ms. Santiago. Those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Now to public comment. 15 minutes have been set aside for any person to express ideas, concerns, or issues not related to those matters that involve public comment with the other items of the agenda. Please state your name and city of residence into the microphone. The recorder may interrupt you if you have not clearly stated name and residence. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on any items that do not appear on the agenda.
Melanie McCord, Provo. I have been watching the council for quite a long time, and I have some lists of suggestions, plans, changes that I have presented to every new council when they come on. I want to compliment the mayor. You've actually fulfilled several of the things, my suggestions that are on there. But I would like to bring those into you. I'd like to consolidate those and bring them to you. List of my suggestions. And it was recommended to me tonight that I actually put them in as part of the record. That I occasionally send emails out of things that I would like to see worked on or done, but that those are never official. those recommendations never make it into a record. There's never any impetus for the council to have to respond to them, and that one of the ways that I can do that is by asking those suggestions and my request for an action on those items to be part of the record. And I'm wondering if that would be all right if I did that. I have some things which I feel very strongly about it would help the city, would help in the workings of the council to make you more effective in the way that you do things, specifically the empowerment of boards and commissions. If you would like to have some time on a work study agenda where I could present that to you in a PowerPoint, that would be great. I would love to have some time on an agenda where I could actually talk to all 7 of you at one time and present to you my idea for the restructuring of how boards and commissions are used and appointed in Provo. So that's what I'd like to ask. I will bring you my lists, have them read into the record, but other than that, would it be all right if I had some time on an agenda sometime?
Will you kindly submit those proposals to Mr. Taylor together with your requests?
Yes.
Thank you.
Dave Connect, Provo, and I'm also the neighborhood chair of the Provo South neighborhood. And I'd like to congratulate the mayor, the whole council, but especially the new council members. And how does it feel to be on the other side? Well, I hope you enjoy your years of service. And as a neighborhood chair, I used to get things all the time from like Louise or the council that I could send out little stories, and I don't get it as much. And I like when I get something I can send out to the neighborhood that is informative and positive about Provo and helps them to see how they can better contribute and be involved in Provo. And I get like the insider stuff, and I like to send out some of that because it fits the bill. So I don't know if we can get more things out of the paper or wherever you glean them that might be kind of inspirational to neighborhoods, that they can do grassroots projects, maybe even reports on some of the matching funds program successes, that people can read that and go, maybe we can do that too. So just I'd recommend that. And the other day I did send out the recap of last year and all the good things that happened, and one person wrote back and said, well, not to rain on your parade, but I've lived on Park Street for 21 years and the sidewalk still needs to be fixed. So that's my official pass along.
Will you please submit that recommendation to Mr. Taylor?
Sure.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Are there others to publicly comment? If not, we will move to item 5, namely to consider a resolution consenting to the appointment of Sue DiMartini to serve on the Civil Service Commission. The presentation, introduction, will be made by Mayor Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reflect back to 4 years ago, and I don't know that I knew what the Civil Service Commission did. I don't want to make any assumptions, and with your permission, since Gary is here, I'd actually like to have Gary, if you would just touch on what this commission does and its purpose, that might help them better understand this appointment.
Under state law, the city is allowed to establish what's called a classified civil service area of personnel management for employees. That comprises currently our police and fire full-time employees. sworn officers and firefighters. And under that state law allows us to designate 3 individuals to serve a 6-year term to serve as commissioners or members of that commission. And the purpose of that is to ensure that there's fairness and that employees are treated, have an opportunity, if there's a grievance that comes up, to be heard by an impartial panel. And typically those things that are heard by them concern anything that would be a suspension over 24 hours, something that may affect their pay, where they would demotion, those types of matters, or where they're a termination. The city has decided to terminate the employee, and they can grieve that through the commission. It's worked well for many years. We've had many, these are individuals from the community. They're not city employees that serve as commissioners, do an exceptional job. One is chosen as a chairman amongst themselves, and we look forward to having a diversity on that commission to represent all areas of the department.
Very good. Any questions about the committee? Thank you. As you know, Ms. Johnson, former councilwoman, has been serving in that capacity and has agreed with her husband to serve an LDS mission, and that necessitates filling the vacancy. As I understand it, we're simply filling this vacancy until the end of her 6-year term, and then she'll need to be reappointed, which is 2018, so it's some years out still. I met with the Sue Martini and had a very nice conversation with her. Sue is currently employed at Brigham Young University in the Employee Relations Department and is the EEOC manager. And that means more now that you know exactly what this committee does. We feel like she's extremely qualified to serve in this capacity, and it's with a great deal of confidence that I recommend her to you to serve in this capacity.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there questions or comments from members of the council? I invite a motion to approve the resolution.
I'll make that motion, a resolution consenting to the appointment of Sue Martini to serve on the Civil Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Winterton. A second. Thank you, Mr. Garrett. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. We consider now an ordinance amending sections 9.51.010, 9.51.020, 9.51.030, and 9.51040 of the Provo City Code to bring them into alignment with the adopted state fire code. This matter will be introduced by Lynn Schofield, the Provo City Fire Marshal.
Good evening. The intent of this amendment is to bring the Provo City Code into conjunction with what's the adopted state code. So I'm going to, if you will allow me, give you just a very brief history of how the codes are adopted here in the state of Utah. There has been a little bit of a change over the last few years. In 2009, the state made a change for the building code and the fire code. Previous to 2009, those codes were adopted by either the Fire Prevention Board or the Building Commission, and then ratified by the state legislature. In 2009, the state legislature determined that those codes should be adopted by the elected officials, and so they took over the responsibility for the adoption of the code to the Utah State Legislature. This past year, in 2013, they pulled all of the building codes into a single section of the Utah State Code. Previously, they'd been scattered around in the health code, the building code, and the public safety titles of the Utah Code. And so in 2013, they brought them all back together into Section 15A of the Utah Code. What we are asking tonight is to bring us up about 15 years. It's been about 15 years since the state of Utah has used the Uniform Fire Code as the adopted state code. And so tonight what we present to you is some ordinances to adopt the Utah State Code as defined in Title 15A of the Utah Code, and adopt that as the base Provo City Code. So basically, we're changing from the Uniform Fire Code to the International Fire Code. The state has adopted that code. It is the code, and the state code actually supersedes the city code. So we'd like to clean that up. That would be item number 1. Item number 2, because the Uniform Fire Code, there are appendices to each of the code bodies. So we propose to you tonight to adopt 4 appendices. Appendix A, which defines the Board of Appeals, their process, and their membership. Appendix B, which is the fire flow requirements for buildings. Appendix C, which is fire hydrant locations and distributions. And Appendix D, fire apparatus access roads. Now these have, again, were adopted under the old Uniform Fire Code, and we're asking that they be adopted. We're currently enforcing those as our baseline code in our development review process. So we're asking you to codify those as part of the Provo City Code. And then on your copy that is on your computer, we have struck out item number 3. And as I was reading that this afternoon, that was a whoops. Because we are asking you to adopt local appendices A, B, C, and D. Section number 3 of this item then becomes applicable again, because it's this. What we're asking you to do is adopt the base state code, the 2012 edition of the International Fire Code, as well as local adoption of appendices A, B, C, and D. And then the rest of the changes throughout the remainder of the ordinance is changing where it says fire chief to authority having jurisdiction. That's just code speak. The references in the International Fire Code, authority having jurisdiction, is in fact the fire chief. So it's bringing it into alignment with what the code reads. And so that is what we are asking for you to consider this evening.
Mr. Miller, if I might just clarify one thing so that you understand what's been handed to you. A hard copy of the ordinance has been handed down the row. The difference between this hard copy and the electronic copy that was distributed earlier is exactly what Mr. Schofield was just saying about the technical correction. And so what has happened is in subsection 2, at lines 55, 59, 62, and 64, the names of the appendices have been inserted where they were not in the electronic version. And at lines 67 and 68, where subsection 3 was struck out, that has been corrected to not take that section out. That's the only differences between this and what you had before.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Chief Jolly, have you anything to add, please?
The only thing I have to say is this just will make our development and oversight in the city a little more streamlined and fall in alignment with our state. And so it will make everybody's job just a little easier following the same code and appendices. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there questions from members of the council?
Just want to say thank you for the work on this, and appreciate all you do for us.
You're very welcome.
How much of this has to do with the new state fire marshal?
I actually have been on the phone with Mr. Porter. We wanted to make sure that we could do a local adoption of the appendices and not run afoul of the legislature, and he assured us that that was in fact a viable thing. So yes, we speak often.
Splendid, splendid. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Please.
The proposal to adopt Appendix D, fire apparatus access roads, are the standards in there consistent with our locally adopted street standards?
Yes, I believe they are. At least the streets folks haven't yelled at me yet, so.
We'll coordinate. take a look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, you've alluded to the fact that a former Provo resident is now the state fire marshal. I would also, the council may not be aware that today the former chief was inaugurated as a city council member in Murray, Chief Camp, and also would not want this opportunity to pass just without acknowledging these two great leaders here that symbolically represent the entire department of excellence, of a nature of big and small. And what I mean by that is events as big as a tabernacle fire to those daily call-outs. Each Monday morning, the chief and I review almost 200 incidences in our city per week that they're called out on. And this is just a good opportunity to give them a shout out and tell them how much we appreciate not only these two, but the entire department that they represent.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Mayor. I invite a motion to approve this ordinance.
I'd like to move that we approve the ordinance amending sections 9.51.010, 9.51.020, 9.51.030, and 9.51.040 of the Provo City Code to bring them into alignment with the adopted state fire code.
Thank you, Mr. Hales. A second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Van Buren. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We will now listen to a biennial report of Provo City's moderate income housing element of the general plan, introduced by Planning Supervisor Brian Maxfield.
Thank you. The state code requires that each city have a general plan, and as an element of that general plan, to have a moderate income housing plan. The purpose of that plan is basically twofold. One is to make sure each city looks at that as a key element to the city. How do you provide housing for many of your residents, and what strategies do you involve? And I think even on a hidden area, to make sure that every city provides an area of moderate income housing. There were some cities, I believe, in certain areas of the state that seemed to want to move those out of their city. And the report basically is that Provo is well within the parameters of that. We provide a very large share of moderate income housing, way beyond the state measurements. What this biennial report is a requirement every 2 years to update that study to show where you are with the median income of an area, what type of building you've had going on, activities, what effort you've made to continue to provide moderate income housing. And the report indicates that, again, we've done several new items. We have several still underway with different housing types that are allowed within the city, broad scale of housing types and income levels. The current median income is about $61,900 in Provo. Moderate income would be 80% of that. And so the report kind of gives the detail as to how to calculate what your monthly payments would be and what you would need to still stay within that means. And the report shows that our housing does still stay within that area. And I'll just open it up to any questions you may have.
Mr. Chair. What type of funding does the city get because of being in the 80%?
There are different fundings that base the amount of money you get on the 80%, such as community development block grants is based on ratios of your percentage that's low, moderate income, 80% below. Some of the home and housing monies that come to the city, the Housing Authority receives a large amount of those monies, is all based on kind of your mix of low, moderate income housing through community. There are some listed in there, and I can kind of do a couple of those, which I believe it's on page 7, if I'm not mistaken. One would, well, maybe I need to back up, I apologize. It'd be the redevelopment agency, because they have the Homes Plus program, which provides ways to for first-time home buyers to get into a home. And that's a big program that the city's had going that has, I believe, helped, and it's listed in there. I knew earlier today what that number was. I'd have to look again, but it seems like it was around 60 or some odd home buyers have been able to get into a home for where down payment assistance has been provided. So there are a number of programs that do go toward that assistance.
Questions from members? Questions from members of the council? I assume, Mr. Maxfield, that your report reassures us of the city's continued best efforts in behalf of those classified as qualifying for moderate income housing. At the same time, we're satisfying a federal requirement for continued eligibility.
And a state requirement.
And a state requirement for continued eligibility.
Yes, we have numerous programs and efforts where I think we're very successful in this regard. So,
please, Mr. Chairman.
I was noticing that some of the properties that were listed as rental properties that qualify for moderate income appear to be student housing. Some of the new student housing projects that have gone in, like the Joaquin Village and some of the others. Is that where most of our moderate income housing is in single student property, would you say?
Those would certainly qualify, but there are adjustments made to discount student housing in some of these formulas. It only goes more toward family. Median household income is different than per capita income. Per capita income, as you probably are aware, the state ranks very low on because of the number of persons per household we have, whereas median income, we're actually fairly high among the states for median family income. And so the students kind of get discounted out of that as in the sense of single families, and it really is a measure of permanent residents of the city more, if you want to call it that. And that's really what we're looking at in looking at this report, is really those that live here and work here and, you know, really full-time citizens of the city in that regard.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maxfield. Turn to an ordinance continuing the date of the mayor's report relative to exempting entities from the Utility Transportation Fund as required by Provo City Code Section 5.08.0905B to January 21st, 2014, and continuing the hearing date for the Municipal Council's consideration of the mayor's report required by the Provo City Code Section 5.08.0906 to no later than February 4th, 2014. This ordinance will be introduced by the council's counsel, Brian Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you will recall, the council recently passed an ordinance implementing a utility transportation fund. And that ordinance, which is Chapter 5.08 of the City Code, included a provision that allowed certain entities within the nonprofit category to submit requests or applications to be exempted from the fee. The ordinance imposed some deadlines, and it required those entities to apply by the end of November, I believe, and for the mayor to submit a report or a recommendation to the council by January 1st, and for the council to act on that recommendation by January 15th. The administration has requested, as they continue to have ongoing discussions with a couple of groups that have applied for that exemption, they've requested some more time to finalize those discussions and their recommendation to the council. So this ordinance simply extends both of those dates out. I will note that even though it's listed as an ordinance, the section of the chapter that dealt with this whole process was uncodified, and so this ordinance also would need to be uncodified and not go into the code book, but it simply changes the due dates of those two acts.
Thank you. Questions, please.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the ordinance, if it's an appropriate time to do so. An ordinance continuing to require the required report and hearing dates relative to exempting entities from Utility Transportation Fund as specified in Section 5.08.090 of the Provo City Code.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. All in favor? Unanimous? Thank you. Mr. Winterton. I beg your pardon. We next consider a resolution to authorize an appropriation of up to $100,000 to Downtown Provo, Inc. within certain parameters, and to authorize the mayor to enter into a contract with Downtown Provo, Inc. for specified services. And we turn to Mr. Taylor for an introduction.
Continuing from a discussion from work session, what is before you is the opportunity to consider a resolution that would continue funding for Downtown Provo, Inc., which has been contracted with the city to provide services to coordinate economic development promotion activities amongst its member organizations, which includes the city. This appropriation would allow them to continue operating into the end of the year, as it was discussed in work session that the proposal would be amended to appropriate $50,000, I believe, to fund them to the end of this fiscal year, and then possibly determining future council discussions, incorporate that into future budget proposals, annual budget proposals. It may be an opportunity at this point to invite Mr. Morgan to present.
Thank you. Let us do so. Mr. Jared Morgan, the Executive Director of Downtown Provo, Inc.
Good evening, all. Welcome, new members. Wanted to take a few moments tonight and discuss where we're at right now, where we were this year, and where we'd like to go. I know that we're going to be discussing benchmarks in February, and I have some slides speaking about that. But I wanted to be sure that we have an understanding of what our expectations are moving forward, what they've been in the past. We're really happy today. Our organization's doing well. We have some new board members that have come on. Of our first board meeting coming up at the end of this month, and we're really excited about it. We have a new position that we're considering opening up that will really help us in a couple areas, help us in areas that I felt that maybe we haven't emphasized as much this last year. I wanted to talk about this slide. I showed this slide, I think, a couple weeks ago. There's been a little confusion regarding how many members we actually have that are paying members of our organization. It is untrue that we are funded by 3 or 4 large organizations downtown. It is true that there are large organizations that contribute to Downtown Provo, Inc., and they're members of ours, and they pay a lot more money than other small businesses in our downtown to be a member. But we do truly have close to 100 paying members, and they range from a couple $100s a year all the way up to a couple $1,000s a year. And we're very proud of that. We anticipate a high level of retention. We're sending out a survey, and I think we're going to have to call on our survey. Our downtown businesses are pretty busy, so we're going to be calling on the survey to see how we did this last year. But we anticipate at the minimum an 80% retention rate on our membership. And wanted to also stress this year, and on this slide, we've spent a lot of time fundraising. We've had to fundraise to meet that primary benchmark of $100,000 in memberships. That's occupied a lot of our time. And as a result, there's areas of our business that need to improve because we've spent so much time on fundraising. And marketing is a big one. We need to do better on marketing. Now that we have our financial base of membership, I feel very confident moving forward that we can retain that membership and get going. I wanted to tell you that all of our members now qualify for discounted UTA passes. It's $180 a year for all of their employees if they want to sign up. They get awesome discounts to the rec center. In fact, I think we've had $7,000 of rec center memberships through our downtown business agreement that have been paid to the rec center. And so we're trying to work on some tangible benefits for our businesses other than that they're just giving back to the downtown community. So next slide.
Mr. Morgan, can we ask questions along the way?
Sure.
On this slide. Could you just clarify on your membership? So to say you have 92 paying members implies that you can be a non-paying member. How many members do you have? How are you a member and not pay?
You either pay an annual fee or you submit some form of trade.
Okay.
So a restaurant would donate food to our Lincoln Lunch in exchange for their membership.
Okay, so to be a member, you contribute something, either in kind or...
There's a transaction that happens.
And what's your potential membership in the downtown district?
So there's roughly 460 business licenses that are issued within our downtown zones. There's two zones downtown. Of those licenses, I'm unaware of which businesses are actually legitimate, that we could actually go after membership for. There's a lot of LLCs, very small. They're unreachable.
But there's still a lot of room to grow this membership then, from 92 to over 300.
Correct.
Okay.
And as businesses move in, our membership potential grows. So I met with Google Fiber today. They'll be joining our organization.
Okay, thank you.
So that's, thank you. Okay, next slide. So you received this, I believe, in your packets. This is what we would like to look at for 2014. We would like to look at the $100,000 cap, the matching funds. That would really help our organization as we continue to grow. Keep in mind, we're still only 12 months old as a membership association, and so city contribution is vital to our success. And so this kind of gives you a snapshot of what we were looking at regarding our agreement with the mayor's office. We have in there an additional $50,000 if we're able to raise that much for the next year, but that's contingent on us actually raising that amount of money. So the current cap is at $100,000. We have the installments listed at quarterly installments. However, we'd like to maybe not have to present every quarter, but maybe semi-annually moving forward. But that's up to your discretion as well. So, next slide. Here's a snapshot of benchmarks. The council office, which, by the way, they've been fantastic to work with. You have a great council staff. You really do. Bryce Mumford does so much, and he's a good man. He and I work closely together on a lot of these issues. Not really issues, benchmarks and proposals. This is kind of a snapshot of some benchmarks that we would like to put in for this calendar year. But we'd also like to really start to look at some broader benchmarks. There's a lot of downtown organizations that use various measurables for success. Something that I've referred to a lot this last year was the sales tax revenues for the downtown zones. I think it's a great indicator of how our downtown's doing and of the awareness that's going on downtown. Our consumer spending is up quite a bit in our downtown zones. That's a great measurable. That should be a benchmark. We can look at property values for property tax income. We could look at jobs created. There's numerous things that we can do that are a little bit more on the macro level that would help help in benchmarks moving forward. And there have been a lot of cities that have done that, and we have examples of those. So Bryce and I will be working on that for February.
Mr. Morgan, I know you reported to us recently, so forgive me for not remembering your 2013 benchmarks, but could you remind us what your 2013 benchmark was for visitors to downtown and what you achieved?
Yeah, so that was primarily through events, and we had a benchmark of 100,000 visitors, and we brought in roughly 50,000.
Okay, so this is an increase from 2013, but a decrease from 2013's benchmark.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lofty benchmark, and some events fell through that we were anticipating coming in, so we came up short on it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Wanted to let you know that there's numerous things that we're still trying to do downtown, and I just this evening we're going to be meeting with a florist. We really would like to improve Center Street in a myriad of ways. The walkability of it is improving, but there still are things about Center Street that need to be better. The lighting is one. We've applied for a grant and we got approved for the grant. Spring of this year, we're going to be having a spring cleanup day, and we'll be installing spotlights on all the Center Street trees that are in the flower beds along Center Street. 2 spotlights per tree. It's going to really brighten up the downtown. We also, Google Fiber threw somewhat of a wrench into our downtown Wi-Fi project. I don't think Veracity is well, I need to speak with them. I don't know how Wi-Fi is going to work out, but we really want to have downtown Wi-Fi. That's been envisioned since our organization was created. And we're almost there. In fact, I think we have invested in access points already. The fibers, there's been construction already on it. So our Wi-Fi district is something that's very desirable for our organization and for the mayor's office too. So we're going to be continuing to look at, hopefully implement those in 2014. Next slide. Wanted to talk about our marketing motives and goals. Again, we focused so much on fundraising this year, and I don't think we're going to have to as much this year because we have a good foundation. We have a really good base. So there's a myriad of marketing opportunities that we're going to start to look at. Something that we've done this year, we did commercials in Cinemark, we did a lot of Facebook campaigns, the website development, done local events, we did a lot of marketing on campus. We've written a lot of articles and submitted them to the papers that were accepted. Downtown was in the news a lot this last year. We'd really like to focus on a buy local campaign, buy downtown campaign. We really need that. Our restaurants really need that. We talk about how many great restaurants we have downtown, but to be honest, a lot of them do struggle. They really do. And so a pretty heavy buy downtown campaign needs to happen. And we're going to be designing that in the next month and rolling that out hopefully in the first quarter. We're going to redo our app. Our app is okay, but we're going to redo its face. Its platform is going to change as well, and our website will continue to evolve. So there's just a snapshot of some of our marketing motives for next year. Wanted to stress the importance of business recruitment with this next slide. We've had a direct influence or a semi-direct influence in a number of these tenants downtown. We work a lot with the Economic Development Department in Dixon Holmes' office on identifying companies we can recruit to downtown Provo. Dave Oka and I make quite a few calls recruiting businesses downtown. And we've had some good successes. The Daily Herald deal is still pending, but that's been a dream of ours, is to have our Utah Valley newspaper downtown, and it's looking great right now. And so we've done a lot of work on that, and I think that is a very tangible return on investment for the council for sure. I want to stress that some of these things, it's hard for the community sometimes to see all that we're doing. that's kind of why I'd like to really start to market a lot more, so the general populace has a really good understanding of our mission and goals. We're a business association, so a lot of what we do pertains to the businesses. But what's a little difficult is half of our funding is coming from the general fund and taxpayer dollars, so we have to show value to the citizens as well. And so that's why we're going to start to focus on more marketing initiatives moving forward. Here's an idea of just all the events that we had last year. We're confident that our events will continue to grow downtown. It's becoming a pretty popular place to hold an event. We've facilitated numerous permits. The mayor's office has been great in helping us expedite permits for our events and things. And so this kind of gives you an idea of where we were at. So that we had a couple thousand come downtown for a New Year's Eve party, so that that 44 number bumped up, so we're pretty close to 50 for this year. But it gives you an idea of the events that we were directly involved in putting on. And next slide. That should be it. Is that it? Okay. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, I know that when we go back to those slides, we talked about 150,000. I think, now tell me about that, because I think the council only...
It's 100.
It was 100.
Right.
That's
With
where we put that.
Potential option of an additional 50.
Tell me about, what does that mean?
So we were looking for an additional 50 if we could fundraise an additional 50,000.
So you would have to have come back to the council and say, we did get, but we approved basically 100.
Correct.
And we hadn't agreed on an additional 50. Okay. No. Also, I heard you mention the other day something about working with Chamber, Utah Valley Chamber. Is that what? Correct. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in 2012, our budget was $242,000. 182 came from the council, and 60 came from our board. 2013, our budget was roughly $202,000. It almost got cut by $50,000. We've had to be very efficient on how we do business. We've had to trim the fat in various areas, and as a result, we've tried to identify a good partner that we could co-locate with that would help streamline some of our processes. We've identified two organizations, the Visitors and Convention Bureau, run by Joel Raker, and the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce, run by Val Hill. Spoken with both organizations, and it would make a lot of sense to co-locate with one of them. And when I say co-locate, I merely mean office with them and share various services. We'd share graphic design services or share marketing services that would cut into both of our costs and be good for both of our overheads. I'm on the board of the Utah Valley Chamber. They're on my board as well. So there's already a lot of interaction. We took a trip on December 5th up to Salt Lake. The Downtown Alliance is housed with the Salt Lake Chamber in Salt Lake. They co-locate, however, they're still their own entity. They have their own revenues, their own bylaws, their own board. So on paper, they're separate. But it's a pretty good marriage. And I feel like it would make a lot of sense for our organization to pursue something like that. So that's that's in the works right now.
Mr. Morgan, is the Downtown Restaurant Association part of your organization, or is that a separate organization?
We currently house that organization under our umbrella. I would probably prefer to have it be its own entity now that it's up and running and it has leadership in it. But that's something that we haven't.
So it's one of your line item budget. It's part of your budget.
The Restaurant Association? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And I missed where you said the funding for the downtown lighting. You said you referred to a grant. Where did that grant come from?
So we applied as the neighborhood chair. I applied for a grant.
Okay.
And I don't know, the funds come through the city, but I don't know where they originate from.
Okay, so that's like a redevelopment grant or something.
That's the neighborhood.
The neighborhood. Okay.
It's under the council.
Okay.
Council budget.
Okay. Great. How much is that?
It's a $5,000 grant.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions, please? Mr. Taylor, would you be so kind to speak further about the matter that you raised in introducing this item regarding the relation between the municipal budget and the budget of Downtown Provo, Inc.? And I think I remember hearing you make a recommendation in terms of waiting to see if the funding for Downtown Provo, Inc. coming from Provo City would become part of the city budget.
Well, there's a couple issues with the budget. One is they're on a calendar year budget. We're on a fiscal calendar year budget. And up to this point, the appropriations are out of sync, per se. That sort of worked out okay because the council has been going off this $25,000 quarterly installment. But it has been each and every time a draw from general fund reserve to put forward. Eventually, it would make probably some sense if the arrangement would continue in the long term to try and get that into the normal budget process. And their budgets are still going to be out of sync, but would allow Jared the assurance that he had funding through the new, up until the adoption of the city budget. And then speaking to Jared's comments about reporting, again, we have a similar arrangement with the Freedom Festival, and they are still required to come to it and report to you annually, and they do so. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It's very helpful. Thank you. So the resolution before us speaks of $100,000. Is it fair to assume?
Yeah, Mr. Jones has some thoughts.
The resolution you have in front of you, it mentions $100,000, but it only in terms of the intent of the council. So the resolution as written expresses that it be the intent of the council over the calendar year of 2014 to appropriate $100,000 for downtown Provo. We noticed this morning that the one you have in your books doesn't actually appropriate any money at all. It only expresses the intent to appropriate in the future. We'd recommend, if you wanted to appropriate money tonight, the addition of some language, and I can give that to you in a moment. What I'll read to you is language that would appropriate $25,000 tonight, given our discussion, our previous discussions of doing it that way. It looks like they've put it up on the screen for us here. So, it was discussed in work session, and Mr. Taylor mentioned previously that one option the council has in front of it is to actually change that number to be $50,000 and have it be the entire amount for the remainder of this fiscal year. So our recommendation would be that if money is appropriated tonight, the language that you see on the screen comprising lines 60 to 62 of the ordinance be added, and then it would be the council's discretion whether the figure is $25,000 or $50,000.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please.
I apologize for any confusion that the short title of this ordinance or resolution conveys. I was under an equal impression that a potential appropriation was the intent of the resolution. We do have one technical problem. I was just going to verify in our council materials if the proper noticing had occurred for a appropriation. Usually appropriations require a 10-day notice under state law. So it may be necessary to continue to actually appropriate the money at this time.
Mr. Jones?
And if that's the case, it would certainly be within the council's prerogative to pass the resolution as written without any amendments in your electronic materials tonight, because it doesn't actually appropriate anything. So you could pass the resolution tonight, laying out the plan and the intent and the policy of the council for the next year. But depending on when the notice was sent out, we may need to come back in 2 weeks' time to do the actual appropriation.
It may And I apologize one more time. I have a series here. I don't know if it'd be helpful. Mr. Mumford is the one that drafted this resolution. If he was given an opportunity to cover that plan, I don't think we formally did that, and that's to my mistake. I apologize.
Are you suggesting that we hear from him?
Do you want to just take a few minutes to cover the content of the resolution? Thank you. Would you prefer?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you. Basically, the extent of the resolution is similar to what we did last year, where we initially appropriated the $100,000. The oversight that was in this one and that we were trying to add at the last minute that might not meet the noticing requirements is that paragraph number 3 where we talk about the appropriation of that money, excuse me, not the appropriation, but actually the authorization of payment of that money was not included in this original document. But basically the bare bones of this is that we are saying that the Provo City is agreeing to a $100,000 dollar-for-dollar match, that those dollars will be given out in quarterly payments, and that those dollars will be used to assist in the day-to-day operations and for downtown promotion. And then there are some other elements. If you scroll a little bit further down on that, we have a few requested contingencies here. January 7th. Each quarter last year, we actually expected Downtown Provo Inc. to give us a line item expense report for the 2013 year. And so that's included here. And in addition to that, on February 4th, we're going to have a more detailed discussion about benchmarks that council is interested, and that's going to be based upon some of the outcome statements from your policy documents. So we're going to break down those policy documents, the outcome statements that you have, and say this is the outcomes that you're expecting from a downtown or a third-party group, and basically give some ideas of what the council can adopt as far as benchmarks that help in meeting those outcomes. And then this document also allows for the mayor to enter into a contract with Jared Morgan at that point based upon that discussion. So that's a rough breakdown of what the resolution includes.
Thank you. Questions?
Mr. Miller?
Please.
And this might be for Jared. It's a little confusing to me because of the city's budgeting time period versus Downtown Provo Inc.'s budgeting time period. This $100,000 matching funds, do we start over January 1st with those matching funds? So are you accounting on our $25,000 new matching funds for you again to match our $25,000 that we're putting in now? Or I'm just confused a little bit as to where these matching funds fit in. Have you used up the $25,000? Are we starting all over again? When do you start doing that, and when do we start doing that?
Yeah, our budgets are based on the calendar year.
On the calendar year. And so last year, you're telling me that you received $100,000 from January 1st, 2012 to December 31st, and so now you're going to start your matching funds over again starting January 1st to get the additional $25,000 that is in our budgeting process for 2014.
And that's correct. Last year, the way that we did that is that each quarter he came, we actually had a resolution authorizing payment, and we indicated the fiscal year ending, the fiscal year from which that would come. And so if you can see at the end of the line here in paragraph 3, it says, and applying to fiscal year ending June 30th, 2014, we are authorizing $100,000 payment for Jared Morgan, but $50,000 of that will be taken from fiscal year 2014's budget, and $50,000 will be taken from fiscal year 2015's budget.
Mr. Chair. Just help me a little more clarification then. So we're really authorized, let's see. We're appropriating to Downtown Provo Inc., $100,000 basically.
Yes.
Which was going to be January to December of 2014.
Yes.
We're authorizing the mayor to appropriate really $50,000, which is January through June of 2014 until the next year's budget.
All this does is actually just authorizes a payment of $25,000. It doesn't authorize any more than that. And then in April, we'll come before you again with another
For the last
$25,000 authorization for payment
And
at that point.
if I could add to that and restate it. If you ignore paragraph 3 up there that's highlighted, which Mr. Taylor has raised the noticing issue about, if you ignore that paragraph, all the ordinance tonight does is says that it's the council's intent to give $100,000 during the year and to consider each appropriation, future appropriations separately. The ordinance as written will not appropriate any money tonight. Then what would happen is in 2 weeks' time or at the February 4th meeting, whenever you wanted to in the first quarter, you could appropriate $25,000 and have them come back in a quarter for another $25,000, or you could appropriate $50,000 for the entire remainder of the fiscal year. And then what's been expressed in our previous meetings is that when the budget comes to you in June, it would contain the $50,000 for the remainder of the year, and you wouldn't make a separate appropriation.
Thank you. Very helpful, Mr. Jones. So there is a sense in which we are, what is before us is action to do again what we did at the outset of 2013. Are there further questions from members of the council? Invite a motion to approve the resolution.
Mr. Miller, can I ask one more question then? So we're appropriation of $100,000. So basically, it's what it says on this one here. So we're still appropriating with the anticipation of a 2014-15 budget.
That's a separate issue.
A separate issue.
Yeah, that is something
So
that will be
this is just a
proposed by the
continuation.
administration. Exactly.
Okay.
The funding for the second half of the calendar year may very well rest on the budget proposal from the administration.
Okay.
We are not authorizing payment by approving this resolution. That is something we'll do 2 weeks hence.
Then I will make a motion to pass the resolution to authorize an appropriation of up to $100,000 to downtown Provo Inc. with certain parameters, and authorize the mayor to enter into a contract with downtown Provo Inc. for specified services.
Thank you, Mr. Winterton. A second, please.
Second.
Mr. Sewell, thank you. All in favor? That is unanimous. I invite a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Make your motion to adjourn. I'll second it.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago, who made the motion, seconded by Mr. Van Buren. All in favor, please. Thank you. That is unanimous.
Welcome, new council members. They aren't all this easy.